Hi, church family. Welcome back to our Bible reading plan summaries. We're excited as we continue to read through the Bible together as a church. This week, we read Acts chapter 5 through chapter 9. And really, what we see there is trouble and a turning point. Really, from chapters 5 through 8, there's this highlight of troubles in the church. First, from within. In Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11, we see Ananias and Sapphira. This story of church members being selfish and holding things back from the people of God. Remember, the church was built on service to God and one another, but Ananias and Sapphira represent sin within the church, where we lie to God and lie to one another. But then we see also problems of service within the church. In Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, we saw that the church was growing, but then our problems weren't just spiritual, but also physical. Because as we grew, we didn't have enough people to serve all of those. So what's established is what we feel is the model and example for deacon ministry to help the elders and the apostles to lead the church in service. But then there's also troubles from the outside. And that's the big theme in chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 is persecution coming into the church. In Acts chapter 5, verses 17 through 42, the apostles were arrested by Jewish religious leaders. And then in Acts chapter 6 through Acts chapter 7, Stephen was arrested and ultimately killed for his faith. And then in Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, we see that Saul was ravaging the church in persecution. He was arresting Christians and going throughout the world to have them persecuted. But even through all of these troubles, both from the inside with sin and service issues, but also from the outside with persecution, we see that God's people remain faithful. The church continued to grow. Several sections mention this. Acts chapter 5, verse 14, 6, verse 7, 8, verses 12 and 13. People continue coming to faith in Christ. And the apostles continued to preach. Acts chapters 5, 12 through 16. Acts chapter 5, verse 21 is what led them to prison. And then even after they got let out of prison, in verse 42, it says they continued preaching. Acts chapter 7 is one long sermon from Stephen. Acts chapter 8, verses 4 through 8, Philip goes to Samaria and preaches. And then verses 9 through 25, this guy named Simon the magician, who used to follow evil religion, comes to Christ through preaching. Then Acts chapter 8, verses 26 through 40, Philip shares with this Ethiopian eunuch who comes to faith. So God's people remain faithful through all the troubles, but even more, understand this theme, God remained faithful to his people. He didn't let the church die through persecution. And this led to one of the most momentous events in church history after Christ's return. And we call that the turning point in Acts chapter 9, which is the salvation of Saul. This is not just a turning point in the book of Acts, but it's really a turning point in the history of the church as Saul, the persecutor, is saved and becomes an apostle to the Gentiles. So personally, this is a turning point in his life as he comes to faith in Christ. But also, on a larger level, Saul will soon become known by the name Paul, his Gentile name, as Saul becomes an apostle to the Gentiles and spreads the faith everywhere he goes. And it influences the church. Ever since really Acts chapter 8, the gospel goes beyond Jerusalem to the nations. And through Saul's work, it becomes a global movement. Even today, we're still influenced by Paul's writings after he comes to faith and by the churches that he established. This didn't just change his life and the church, this changed the world. Christianity, as we know it, influences the whole world through the work of Paul. So throughout this section, we see some troubles, which remain common in the church, right? Sin and service issues. But we also see the power of God in turning things around. This should be an encouragement to us. First, God has the power to change your life today, no matter what circumstances you're in. We see this as he changed the life of Simon who was following all sorts of evil religion, and Saul, who hated Christianity and hated God. But God changed their lives. And if he changed their lives, he can change yours today too. He can change your circumstances. You can trust in him. But second, we see that God has the power to change the church and really get our church through anything. If the church survived all of this infighting and outfighting in its early days when it was small, think of what the church can do today as we remain faithful to God. God, if he kept them alive then, he's going to keep us alive today, no matter what problems we see in the church. So what an encouraging section. Acts chapter 5 through 9, we see a lot of trouble, but we see a huge turning point. And God has the power to change your life and your church because he has your life and your church in his hands today. Let's continue reading and be encouraged in Acts chapter 10 and beyond. I'll see you in the next one.